Good morning, historians. Welcome to On This Day in History. Well, the quote on the left of the screen, history happens twice because people don't listen the first time. That is going to be unbelievably true for On This Day in History for many reasons, actually. So let us dive into it. On this day, daily insight to what has happened in the past and how it has influenced the events of the present. Okay, because yesterday makes today and changes what happens tomorrow. Remember, history is not just a bunch of stuff that happened, well, it is, but it's also influencing the world we live in today. Think of it this way. If you turned on a movie halfway through, you would have no idea what's going on. You need to watch the start of the movie. You need to figure out how you got there. Yeah? That's kind of what history is. How did we get here? Why is the world the way it is now? What happened beforehand? Okay? So, history is always shaping your world. It shapes today. And you guys, hopefully, are going to be the ones that shape tomorrow. Okay, so let's take a short look at what happened today. On this day in history, the 8th of May. Well, like I say, I just cherry pick a few of these particular events. A whole bunch of different things happen on the 8th of May, but these are the ones that I wanted to talk about. So that's what we're going to look at. First things first. In 1660, English Parliament declares Charles Stuart to be King Charles II of England. Now, ordinarily, the Parliament recognizing that there was a King of England may not be the most exciting event to happen in a day, but this is where the context comes in. What happened before that day in 1660 to make this day in 1660 so different, so interesting, so relevant? Well, there was this whole thing, and maybe you've heard of it, I don't know, called the English Civil War. And that was pretty much fought between people who supported the king or people who supported the parliament. And the fight was all over, can the king do whatever he wants, or is it the parliament who are elected or appointed by their local constituencies, and should power reside with the people, and all of those sorts of ideas, when really it was just a bunch of lords thinking that they should be mini kings. But anyway, that's a whole other thing. And they had a whole fight, and Charles I was in fact not only arrested but executed, and England was without a king for many years. And so all of a sudden in 1660, they decided, you know what, this no king thing is no good. So we're going to bring one back. So this parliament appoints or recognizes Charles II as king once more. So they said, no king, tra la 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 la. That's a Lion King reference for anyone playing at home. And it didn't really work out so well. This guy, Oliver Cromwell, maybe you've heard of him. He ends up sort of running the country as a non-king king. Things go a little bit off the rails, shall we say. And eventually they decide, you know what, it was better with a king. It was better with a king. So they appoint the king back. This is one of those classic examples in history where you have a revolution of some sort, where they go, this is terrible, we don't want that, and you get rid of it. And then eventually you go, oh, actually, it wasn't that bad. The other way was better. And you end up back where you started. Okay. Now, in 1877, the first Westminster Dog Show was held. Now, I have included this only because I love dogs and I particularly love my dog. But this is, I think, also one of those things where it looks like not necessarily the most important thing that's ever taken place, but if you actually look at it, actually think about it, it tells you a lot about society at the time. So this is another thing that you can do with history. You can look at a particular event and go, okay, well, that's interesting. But think about, hang on, why in 1877 was the first Westminster Dog Show held? Why not in 1777? Why not in 1977? Why 1877? Why was it then? Well, I mean, you can look at all sorts of particular reasons, but I think this is quite demonstrative of the fact that by 1877, you're sort of getting towards the end of the Industrial Revolution. And people have a lot more free time on their hands because people are working 17 hours a day sewing a sheet or something. They've got machines that do it. The population's also gone up, so you've got a lot more workers, which means you've got shifts taking place in factories. You've got a lot more downtime. Now, again, they worked much longer days than we do today, the typical person, in fact. But because of these machines, because of these factories, you end up with almost the emerging of like a middle class society, and particularly the upper class sort of expanded a little bit as well. These people sort of were able to make their way into the upper aristocracy because their factories were making money, whereas before it had to be inherited. So we've got this whole conversion of events here where some people have a bit more spare time, some people have a lot more money, there's a lot more leisure time, people are looking for entertainment. And of course, because of all of those things, people are looking for entertainment, people have more time on their hands, there's time to organize a dog show, and there's time to sit around talking like, well, my dog's the best dog. No, my dog's the best dog. Well, let's figure it out. Let's have a dog show. And that's exactly what ends up happening. So this is actually quite demonstrative of the fact that people have spare time on their hands. They're not working 7 days a week, 18 hours a day. I mean, some people still are, must point that out. But this is one of the things. It's like all of these little things can tell you all sorts of events about the era. And of course, I love dogs, so it's pretty cool that they had a dog show. Okay, now this is the big one for today. VE Day. World War II ends in Europe after Germany signs an unconditional surrender. VE Day, victory in Europe, because of course World War II was not just fought in Europe. It was fought, well, across North Africa. It was fought in areas of the Middle East, in fact. There were battles that took place with German submarines all through the Atlantic. But in particular, there is another whole stage, a whole theater of war, which is the Pacific region in the war against Japan. So they were able to defeat the Germany in Europe. The Nazi Germany in Europe was defeated. So they knew that, yep, we've won that part of the war, but there's a whole other part of the war. So they couldn't say, yay, the war's over. They said, all right, victory in Europe, VE Day. That's how it got its name. Okay. Now, this one, I think, is, again, rather demonstrative of the times, if you will, but it's sort of almost an overlooked or forgotten event in history. On this day in 1967, Muhammad Ali, maybe you've heard of him, the greatest boxer of all time, he was indicted for refusing induction in the US Army. Now, what that means is essentially he was charged, he was arrested, if you will, formally placed under, scrutiny, if you will, by the justice system, because he said he didn't want to join the army. He was drafted, so they have a thing called a draft. Your name comes up, you have to join the army, and he said, I'm not doing that. Which was interesting. A few people did that, but this is Muhammad Ali. When he says he's not doing that, he's going to draw some attention. And he had a lot to lose because the country of, well, a lot of countries, but especially the country of America, they're particularly patriotic, particularly, I suppose some might say, militaristic. They loved their armed forces. And so when Muhammad Ali, a very famous celebrity at the time, said, I am not joining the army, I'm not going to kill someone, I'm not going to, this was not just him disobeying the law, this was him almost insulting the accepted culture of the time. Anyone who was a pacifist, anyone who was saying America shouldn't go to war, anyone who's, they were not treated particularly well. And it took a lot of guts for Muhammad Ali to do this. What ended up happening after he gets charged with this is he ends up getting stripped of his gold medal. He gets banned from boxing. This could have been the absolute end of his career, but he took what we would call these days a principled stance. And he said, I'm not joining the army. He didn't want to go kill people in Vietnam. The war in Vietnam is what this was about, which, again, huge thing. It's one of the reasons I think he became such a hero, because he stood by the courage of his convictions. I also include this because of the fact that, well, there's a thing when people don't want to go to war, they're called cowards, they're called not very brave, they're accused of being not very tough. Anyone who would think that Muhammad Ali is not tough, not strong, not brave, is obviously ridiculous. So this is another thing that sort of demonstrated at the time he was changing the culture, as it were. Because if this big, tough, strong guy who literally punches people in the face for his job, okay, but he says, but war's stupid, all right? We both agreed to fight. I agreed to fight him, he agreed to fight me, we fight. What he's saying about war is, no one agreed to this. This is terrible. And it's quite a big moment. Now, on this day in 1980, particularly relevant here in 2020, obviously, the World Health Organization announced that smallpox was gone. This disease that had been ravaging humans for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. Thanks to the vaccine and the particular program and herd immunity and all these particular things, smallpox is disappeared from planet Earth, which is a huge, 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 huge deal. And it's a great moment in medical science. I think it's one of those things where, just like how King Charles I sort of got well, separated from his body, shall I say, decapitated. They got rid of their king. So this is terrible. Then they realized actually not having a king is not great. Let's bring a king back. That's not what's going to happen with smallpox, hopefully, in terms of bringing it back. But in terms of wow, yeah, World Health Organization vaccines, these are great, these are awesome. Now all of a sudden we're sort of going this stage where there's anti-vaccine, antitrust of the World Health Organization. That's like getting rid of the king. And hopefully we get to the stage where they go, actually, no, medicine's great and science is great. And hopefully we end up seeing an end to the anti-vax movement and an end to people distrusting science and all of those things as well. Okay, now this is actually a two-parter for the last two here. 2008, Dmitry Medvedev appoints Vladimir Putin as Russian Prime Minister. Now, what happened in 2008 is Vladimir Putin had been president of Russia from the year 2000. And Russia had a constitutional rule that said you could only be president of Russia for 4 years, and then you have to have an election. And if you get elected again, you can be president for another 4 years. So that's what happened. So Putin is president in 2000. There's an election in 2004. He gets elected. He becomes president again. And he's president in 2008. But their rule said that's it. You can only be president twice, then you're out. So in 2008, Vladimir Putin doesn't really want to not be president anymore. But the Constitution says he's not allowed. So he goes, all right, I won't be president. So this guy, Dmitry Medvedev, who had served as the prime minister for Vladimir Putin, he runs for president and wins. And the first thing he does is go, you know what? You know who I think would make a great prime minister? Vladimir Putin. So Vladimir Putin went from being the president with Dmitry Medvedev as his prime minister to Dmitry Medvedev being the president and Vladimir Putin being the prime minister. So, you know, a bit of a step down, a bit of a demotion. But in actual fact, the first thing that Dmitry Medvedev did as president was he declared, you know what? I want to limit the powers of the presidency. I don't want to be the all-powerful in charge. I'm going to limit the powers and give the prime minister much more power. So hang on a second. All of these powers that used to belong to the president belong to the prime minister. And look who just happens to be the prime minister now. It is Putin. What an odd coincidence. And anyway, then in 2012, they'd had a bit of a constitutional amendment in Russia saying, guess what? You are allowed to be president more than twice if you wish. So in 2012, guess what? Vladimir Putin becomes president again. And what does he do when he's president? Hey, you know who I think would make a great prime minister? Dmitry Medvedev. So I just thought that was particularly amusing. And of course, the first thing that Dmitry Medvedev does as prime minister is give back all of those powers the prime minister used to have to the office of the presidency. So basically, Vladimir Putin was president until 2008 with all these powers, becomes prime minister from 2008 to 2012, and those presidential powers got transferred to the prime minister. Not president again in 2012, and all those prime minister powers go back to Putin. Essentially, Putin has all the power all the time. I just think that's a particularly amusing event in terms of, did they really think we wouldn't notice what was going on there? Okay, time for today's deep dive. The surrender of Nazi Germany. This is a rather big deal. So this photo here is the German commander, Wilhelm Keitel, who is signing the unconditional surrender of Germany in the ruins of Berlin. Wow, that's it. It's all over. There's nothing else to talk about. Obviously, with this, we've got VE Day in Europe. The war is over. Fantastic. But when is VE Day really? I know you're probably sitting there going, well, what's this video all about then? If you just said it was on this day in history, it's VE Day. What do you mean, when is VE Day? Well, let me put it to you this way. I was taught in school that VE Day was the 9th of May. So this is the 8th of May, sorry, and I've just told you that it's VE Day. But I was taught in school that it was the 9th. Now, was my teacher wrong? Perhaps, but perhaps not. Let's take a look at. Because in America, in the textbooks that I saw when I was over there, it says that the day was the 7th of May. Well, that's interesting. But in the UK, and if you look in your textbooks, if you've got any, it's today, the 8th of May. So how did all of this happen? Was it a matter of time differences, international dateline, or just a bit of confusion? Was it the 7th? Was it the 9th? I don't know. Let's just split the difference. We'll call it the 8th. Well, a bit of that and a bit of not. Let's take a look. So World War II technically ends twice in Europe. What happens is on the 7th of May, in a small red brick schoolhouse in the French town of Reims, okay, German Representative Alfred Jodl signed the Instrument of Unconditional Surrender on behalf of the Nazi High Command. So the Nazis surrender on the 7th of May in France, and there are representatives from the USA, the UK, USSR, various other countries as well, who signed this particular document. So, well, that's it then. Germany surrendered on the 7th of May. It's all over the day, 7th of May, right? Well, not quite. Because the Soviet Union said, absolutely, that is not the real surrender. Thank you very much. Because we are the ones who are currently occupying in Germany. We're the ones who were the first into Germany. We're the ones who are in Berlin. And if it's not signed in Berlin, Germany won't accept it as a surrender. If they sign it in France, they'll feel like it was forced. It has to be signed in actual Berlin by the actual German commanders there. And they said, yeah, actually, that's a pretty good point. All right. Yeah, okay, you're right. If we don't have a formal signing in Germany, especially in the German capital of Berlin, maybe people won't accept it as a formal surrender. There might be some resistance to this. So let's do that. So they agreed to sign the formal surrender of Germany the following day, the 8th of May in Berlin. Well, then that settles it. It must be the 8th of May, right? Well, yeah, kind of. So this is the picture I was showing you at the beginning of the video, where Wilhelm Keitel signs the surrender of Germany in the ruins of Berlin. But this is the thing. Technically, as they're getting this document signed, the Allies are debating amongst themselves who's going to get what. What does this mean? Are they surrendering directly to me? Are they surrendering directly to you? Hang on, if this document says that you're surrendering to Zhukov, who was the Soviet general, does that mean that Dwight D. Eisenhower, the head of the Allied forces from the West, does he get a say? And they're debating back and forth. And by the time it actually is signed, it is after midnight. So it is nearly 1 a.m. on the 9th of May. But it was backdated. They said, oh, yeah, well, hang on. It was meant to be signed on the 8th, so they backdated it. So this is what happens. The West celebrates it on the 8th of May, although in America, in some textbooks, they've backdated it to the 7th of May because that was when they surrendered to the American general. And the Soviet Union celebrates on the 9th of May when the Berlin signing took effect. Now, why was I taught the 9th of May in school? I grew up in Australia, not in the Soviet Union and not in Russia or any other Eastern Bloc countries. Well, essentially in Australia, they decided, well, 1 a.m. in Europe on the 9th of May is, 1 in the afternoon in Australia on the 9th of May when the news comes through. So they said, well, technically it got signed the 9th of May in Europe. It is the 9th of May in Australia because of the time difference, quite clearly. It's the middle of the 9th of May. That's when the news comes through. So that's when it was declared. VE Day in Australia was declared on the 9th of May. And in a bunch of countries, the same thing would have happened in New Zealand and other places that are a few hours ahead as well. So this is why VE Day, Victory in Europe, is celebrated twice in most of the time in Europe, on the 8th and the 9th of May. As I said, growing up, I always thought it was the 9th of May. But in some places, it's still considered to be the 7th of May. Let's just split the difference and call it on this day in history, the 8th of May. VE Day, Victory in Europe. So I hope that explains that confusion there. I hope you've learned something today. Obviously, you can indeed research these particular dates and information and names for yourself. If I could make a suggestion, looking into the Muhammad Ali refusal into the army, you will hopefully learn something and hopefully have as much respect for the man as I do, one of my absolute heroes. Uh, but any particular event or any particular information I give you or any particular confusion, obviously let me know, ask me any questions. I'm happy to address anything at all. But more than anything, I hope you learned something today. So on this day, I wish you happy VE Day.